We've waited all year. We are finally here. It is time for the Big 12 championship game. My name is Josh Neighbors, the host of Locked On Big 12. Joining us today, it is Stephen Simcox, the host of Locked On Horned Frogs. We are previewing the 2022 Big 12 championship game between TCU and Kansas State. That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. We are on the way to 2,800 right now. Our goal is 3,000 subs by January 1st, 2023. So help us make that happen. Follow us on Twitter at LOBig12. You guys can find me at Josh Neighbors _ Stephen Simcox, you are here today. TCU flag is behind you for those of you who are not watching. To represent the Horned Frogs, although K-State fans might hate this, I am here to help represent the K-State perspective as we preview this game. I've got my Willie the Wildcat shirt on. First question, Stephen, is, and I mean like this year and in the future, what is on the line for TCU in the Big 12 championship game on Saturday?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. I think you start with the college football playoff implications, and it feels like they're in a good position regardless, but I don't trust the committee enough to say that they are just absolutely in if they lose on Saturday. I think losing your final game of the season in a game where most of the country is going to be watching would not be a great look. It would give the committee an easy way to spin the narrative of saying, oh, well, look at Ohio State. They only had a loss to Michigan. I don't really think Alabama's in the mix here, even though some people still think they're sort of lurking with the two losses that they have. So I think it's there. Also, just, I mean, if you come away with a 12-0 regular season and you don't win a Big 12 championship, that's super disappointing. Like, you can potentially make up for it if you make and then win a playoff game. But to not have a trophy to show for going through the round-robin schedule and not taking a loss would not be the way you want to end the season. And I just think like this team has passed every test so far this year. They have a great opportunity in front of them. And so to keep kind of the momentum and mojo going, it's important that they find a way to win and be 13-0, be Big 12 champs. They don't have an outright Big 12 title yet. Like the one title they have was in 2014. And Baylor can always say, well, we won the head-to-head matchup. And so they had to split that trophy. And so this would be the first kind of, outright Power 5 conference championship for the school and this university. It'd be a huge win for Sonny Dykes in year one.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think, it's like remove all doubt, right, is kind of the goal.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you and I are discussing this on the day that that the Big 12 or 12-team playoff is now being finalized, right? We're recording this on Thursday. We just got the news that it's a done deal. And, you kind of wish that was almost the case this year, right? Because if that was the case, then TCU would probably pretty much be safely in the field, but still playing for that seeding in a top 4, spot, whatever. But, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that it feels like TCU has to win because of the lack of respect that they're getting for being a Big 12 school. I mean, we're even seeing it on, ESPN First Take every single week. There just seems to be a segment where it's like, all right, let's do 2 minutes of Paul Feinbaum dumping on TCU, clearly a team that he's clearly never watched at all. Right. And for as much TCU he has not watched, he's probably watched even less K-State. And I would say what's in the line for the Wildcats this weekend is, like they're kind of this beacon of what like a team can look like when you have some struggles during the year, and then you kind of find the right group of guys, especially on offense, and kind of get it rolling. If this were a 12-team season, I mean, K-State's right there with the ability to go and make a playoff. And I don't think anybody would want to play a 10-3 K-State team, in the college football playoff. It's just won the Big 12 championship and things like that. And also too, like for the program, to win the last Big 12 title before the conference begins to change, they add new teams. Like that's really important for them because we're seeing this kind of everything's turning right now. And we've seen such a turnover at the top of the league, right? The last 3 Big 12 championship games have featured 6 different teams: Oklahoma, Iowa State, Baylor, Oklahoma State, TCU, and Kansas State, right? And so to get a Big 12 title and to kind of show, all right, like, we are one of those teams that can not only flex on those certain years, upgrade 8-5, 7-4, and turn it into a 9-3, 10-2, but we can go and we can win and we can beat an undefeated team while doing so. I think that's really significant for them. And thinking about this game, Stephen, from the TCU perspective, what are you most worried about? As I put it up on here, 11 a.m. on ABC, TCU, number 3 in the country, 2.5-point favorite. Kansas State, number 10 in the country right now, over under 62.5. What is your biggest concern for TCU as we head into this weekend?
Well, so the first matchup was so weird. I think both teams came away thinking they really left, a lot on the table. Obviously, Kansas State had the quarterback situation. Adrian Martinez plays one drive. He goes out. Will Howard comes in, just lights it up. 4 touchdowns on 4 straight possessions. He's throwing the football all over the place. And they go up 28-10. And then TCU scores a couple of touchdowns at the end of the half and the start of the second half. Howard goes down. And K-State was never really able to get that back. And so I know from a Kansas State perspective, this offense is rolling right now. Now, an interesting thing about the TCU angle here is they were missing, and I wouldn't have thought this was a huge deal at the time, but they were missing Bud Clark and Millard Bradford, 2 of their starting safeties in that matchup. And if you look at that stretch of games, like Jason Bean at Kansas just had his way.
Torched them.
Yeah, in the air the week before. Will Howard was great. Spencer Sanders had a really nice first half before they kind of locked it in. I think he was obviously dealing with the shoulder injury. That was an issue for him all year as well. But the pass defense has gotten a lot better since those 2 guys have gotten back in the lineup. So I think what I'm most worried about, Deuce Vaughn is explosive, and I know he's going to get his yards both on the ground and as a receiver as well. But it's, can they get pressure on Will Howard and force him to make big-time throws? Because if he's allowed to just sit back there and kind of pick them apart like he was in the first game, then they could be a problem. And I guess, Josh, just like, where do you see this K-State offense now? Because, they saw Howard, but it was in the, he came in the middle of the game. I think K-State was probably still figuring out how to call a game with him on the field. And now he's really their unquestioned starter, and Colin Klein's done a really good job of revamping this offense in a way that makes them really hard to stop.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about it is the same way that Max Duggan is really good at distributing to all their weapons. They do a really good job getting everybody involved, I think. Same thing applies for Kansas State. They use Brooks and they use Knowles, and they do a really good job using the tight ends, using Ben Sennett as well, using Deuce Vaughn, DJ Giddens. That's the thing about this offense now is, like, the distribution for them has become so much more even. And I think that, like, you're seeing across the board. I wish Texas offense could have achieved that this year. They really couldn't end up doing that. But, like, the best offenses in this league, I thought last year there was a whole lot of riding running backs, right? Riding certain players. And look, there is a bit of that for TCU with Kendre Miller. Sure, it's a huge part of their offense. But, like, the whole thing is when TCU moves the ball around, you're like, oh, my God. Like, Darius Davis is really fast. Like, Tay Barber's really fast. Like, how are you going to cover Quentin Johnson? Like, oh, my God, Kendre Miller's a bowling ball. Like, and it's, you got to cover, DeMarcado out of the backfield. Like, it's a lot of that too now for K-State, where I thought the problem they had with Martinez, especially early in the season, was it felt like it was a lot of big explosive running plays is what they had to hit.
Yeah.
And that's not the case anymore. Like, their running game, they'll hit some of those, but it's much more methodical running game, and their passing game has become a bit more explosive. They're just really good at moving the ball down the field. And Cade Warner's been a huge part of that. Ben Sennett's been a big part of that. Just even added a little bit Sammy Wheeler at times this year. Like, they've got 5 or 6 guys, and they really make you cover the whole field. I think much like you could say TCU does the same. So I think it is that idea of, all right, like, we got to heat the quarterback. The quarterbacks are going to experience some heat. I think that's the key here, because those guys, if you give them time, it's just really difficult to cover everybody. And I know TCU's got 2 really good corners, and Newton also with Trey Hodges-Tomlinson, but, like, you got to cover everybody. You got to cover the whole field. And that's a challenge here, I think, for TCU is going to be covering the whole field, because Will Howard's done an excellent job. I will say the one thing they don't do with him is they don't run him a whole lot. So that is something that would be interesting if they made him get out of the pocket, made him move around, but they've done a pretty good job protecting him as well. And I just want to ask you about something else here. Path to victory. Unless you had something else, it's
no. This is good. We can
path to victory for TCU. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's strange. You mentioned Kendra Miller. They've really kind of become a ground and pound team, at least in the second half of football games now.
Yeah.
So they do. It seems like they have their full complement of weapons with Johnston, and he's going to be back this week. Tay Barber and Darius Davis have kind of been in and out of the lineup as well. But I feel like it really starts with just running the ball well and getting into more manageable second and third downs. I felt like Max played maybe his best game ever against Iowa State last week. Like, he just looked really in control, made some great throws. It helped that they jumped on that team early and the Cyclones were kind of ready to go home. But he looked about as comfortable as he has, in the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season where he's lighting it up. So the offense, I believe, will be fine. K-State's got a good defense, but I think they can score. And then defensively, you talked about heating them up. I'm really curious to see, like, Joe Gillespie is not a guy who believes in bringing a lot of pressure. Like, he really wants to keep it at least early in games with his front three trying to get there. But I just don't think you can drop 8 and, 7 and 8 all day and let Kansas State run the routes they want. Like, there has to be some blitz packages here. One thing to watch, too, is Johnny Hodges, who won Defensive Newcomer of the Year yesterday. He's a transfer from Naval Academy. He plays their middle linebacker position. He's got a hamstring pull, and they didn't rule him out on Tuesday, but I don't know. It's all about the severity of it. I would just be really surprised if he's like full go and playing his full snap count, a week later. So Shadrack Banks has been kind of their fill in, and he's done a nice job. And they really don't have anybody else behind those guys who have played much or had any experience. So I think one thing that Baylor did, that Jeff Grimes did in that game a few weeks ago, is he ran a lot of counter. He did a lot of false reads with the guard and tackle. They were doing
some exotic things with the offensive line of that. I mean, there were guys all over the place.
Yeah, some crazy window dressing in the run game, and it worked. I mean, they were getting like 7 or 8 yards a pop. Right. Iowa State tried to replicate that, but they couldn't execute it well. I'm imagining Kansas State can do that at a pretty high level, maybe not all day long, but to a certain extent. So can they slow that down? Because after they shut down Bijan in that Texas game, they've really struggled against the run a little bit in the past few weeks. So can they stop that, and can they get pressure on Will Howard? Those are the things I'm really looking for. You talked about the two corners. I mean, I think their secondary's gotten better. But as you said, you can't cover guys for 10 or 11 seconds. It's just a tall task if you're going to have to do that. But from the K-State angle, what do they have to do to kind of get a victory in this rematch on Saturday?
They need to, I think, get an early lead, because this is the thing. You look at Max Duggan at the end of that game, like he both drives, he just nailed it. I know the throw was a little bit off to DeMarcado in the 2-point conversion, and probably should have been a catch too, kind of 50-50, I think, in terms of blame. But like, they gave him the ball back, and it was curtains. Like, he's too good. Like, their offense is too good. And so I think if you're K-State, you have to put this game out of reach in the third, fourth quarter. Like, you have to keep going. There is no sitting on it. And I think that's the mistake Dave Aranda did and made with Jeff Grimes. They sat on that thing, man. Even you could tell the emphasis was to keep and hold the ball. Shapen could have given that thing a go, try to get that first down, that third down, and didn't do it, and kind of gave himself. Well, and
then they had like 4th and 2, and
they go for it.
Their whole bid is going for it, and they
went away from that there. And so I think I think for them, like, they have to keep it up all game long. And I will say, like, the one thing you mentioned, be ready to adapt, because one thing is not going to work against TCU's defense the whole game. That's not been the case at all this year, right? The one thing they do really well is making adjustments. And I think the one thing that other teams have not done as well is making the adjustment to the adjustment. And look, Kansas State, I'm not sure we can say they had that opportunity in the first game. I think it's pretty fair to say.
Sure.
Because of the rotating door of quarterbacks they had. But like, the one thing TCU does so well is blood in the water, man. It's over for you every single time. Like, you have to be like, once you get that lead, you have to be really, really careful to, like, limit your mistakes, but also at the same time keep going forward. That's the one thing that's really difficult about playing TCU, is like, how do you do both, right?
Yeah.
How do you stop? How do you make sure you're not too regressive or conservative on offense, but also still trying to push the ball forward and score and put them in a bigger hole, right? Like that's kind of what's cost teams at times against TCU this year. And so I think that's the thing for K-State is like, find that rhythm of trying to keep that TCU defense off balance. And if you can get there and like, just keep it up all game, expect the adjustment for them, especially on the offensive side of things. And on defense, you know, the one game I think we look at here where things really went wrong for TCU was the Texas game. And that is because I think Texas athletes up front were way too much for TCU's offensive line, which is a big problem. We go to the playoff. That's the story of a different day.
Yeah.
I mean, there was not even I think still Max's calf is a bit dinged up. Do you agree with that? Because he has not looked right since that West Virginia game, running the ball.
No, yeah, he's lost some explosiveness, and I think he's holding on to the ball a lot longer than he typically would in these normal situations.
If you can collapse that pocket on him, man, I mean, he will go. You know, he kind of looks like almost like Eli Manning, right? You remember Eli Manning those last couple of years of just turtle,
just sit down,
just with turtle. And look, you know, I don't blame him at certain times. It also helped him protect the football a bit more, I think, this year than he has in the past. And so that's what I would say too: is you got to generate that pressure. You got to generate that pressure because I know Kansas State's got good corners too. You can't cover these guys. You can't, even if Quentin Johnston's like hurt. And is he good to go?
They say he's good to go. They say his ankle. I mean, he's got a sprained ankle, and they haven't had any time off. So it's basically like each week has been he goes as long as he can go, and then somebody falls on it or he tweaks it, and then he's out. But he did rest last week, and Sonny said he looked the best he has in about a month. So, and
even that Texas game, he was injured. Right. Yeah. And I still got loose. Now it's coverage bust, so it could happen to anybody. But like, you know, that guy will make you pay anytime. I mean, you mess up. And I think that's also the one thing about his game where he is such a difference maker is he's so good at obviously you can catch contested balls, sure, whatever. You can go deep. We saw that. He showed that more last year. But like now that Max is more good in the intermediate, we've seen so much more of that working to the football open space skill where he's just like, he does the basketball player thing, right? Like he's really good at essentially posting up. I think the Kansas game was a clinic in that. He basically would just post up and like drop step and guys would run by him or run past him and he hits the Jets and he's good. So we'll see on the ankle, but you got to, you know, contend with that guy's size and speed. Savion Williams' size and speed. Darius Davis' speed. Tay Barber's speed. Like Tay Barber will go quiet for three quarters and then all of a sudden 38-yard touchdown, you know, because he's loose. So that's what you have to contend with. And I'd rather just get after the quarterback, right, than have to deal with that all day. The dam eventually breaks. We saw it against Texas. It eventually will break. But can you limit the number of times that it breaks?
Well, and I mean, Tech had some success with this too. And obviously, like Tyree Wilson is a dog. So that was a big part of it. But
yes,
they were
the rightful defensive player of the year in the Big 12, mind you, also.
They were bringing pressure. And I mean, Max was uncomfortable. Like through 3.5 quarters, he was frustrated. And that is one thing. He's gotten a lot better at it this year. But he is a pretty emotional guy, which is part of the reason why he can be good at times. But the flip side of that is he'll get to a point where he tries to like win the game himself, or he just gets, you know, so irritated with not being able to get a pass off that he kind of loses ball security control and all those things. And so I expect him to try to do that. And TCU's tackles in Brandon Coleman and Andrew Coker they've shown some weakness at times, and they held up pretty well against K-State in that first matchup. I'm curious to see what adjustment they makes, but it's hard to beat that. In the front three in the interior, their two guards and their center are really good. Their tackles are a little more suspect, and when they have trouble in the O-line, that's usually where the pressure is coming from. Yeah,
and Kansas State's done a good job getting after the quarterback this year. They're third, and I think in league play getting to the quarterback, and also they don't allow many sacks, right? They don't allow a ton of sacks. I will say that the one thing I think benefits TCU is like that speed of the linebacking core is pretty impressive. Now, Johnny Hodges, how is he not on the first team? Why is D Winters? I know D Winters might be more talented. Like, why is D Winters on first team all Big 12?
Yeah, D's had I don't know. He had like 7.5 sacks, and I'm assuming that like people looked at that and went with him. But I was surprised. He's had a good year, but I was surprised that he was first team linebacker.
They've got everything in that linebacking core, right? I mean, Hodge is your big stick.
Punisher, yeah.
Is your stick. We've seen that a million times. Winters is like your, I guess, more pass rushing, you know,
kind of sideline to sideline guy.
Yeah. And Hodges is the guy who's just everywhere, right? He's a tackling machine. He just racks him up. And also the same for, Perry in the back end too. Like, I think people don't talk about this enough. TCU's two leading tacklers are both transfers this year. And, on a team that's largely the same guys, I think it's pretty impressive those two guys are the leading tacklers. As far as like a prediction goes, do you think that TCU can win a second time against Kansas State? Everybody says it's difficult to do, but to me, it's going to be a much different ball game. And you almost kind of throw out the first game, I think, in some ways.
No, I'd agree with that. And, I might be getting too caught up in the matchup with Iowa State because it did go so well. And that was really the first – it sounds weird to say for an undefeated team. That was the first time this year that they really dominated a game from start to finish against an opponent that they had similar talent.
Oklahoma?
Yeah, Oklahoma. That's true.
Oklahoma too, yeah.
They owned that game for the most part. But it had been a while. But they had, they had really gotten in this rut of like just survive and advance. And I think Coach Dyke said, like, after the Baylor win, the guys just kind of took a deep breath. It just seemed like collectively they were like, okay, well, we got past that one, and surely it's not going to be crazier than that. Maybe we can just relax a little bit. And so they got healthier last week. I think the energy will obviously be high for both teams. I just feel like TCU's speed in that indoor stadium should play a big factor. I think the offense is going to do its work. I think the defense will do enough. And I expect it to be a close game, but they're comfortable in those situations. So I think TCU wins. I think they cover. I don't feel like it's going to be a blowout, but obviously the spread, as you see there, is pretty thin. So I got the Frogs winning it. And what's your thoughts on the matchup, Josh?
I'm the same way. I got TCU winning this game because I see it being close. And like, here's the thing is that, I guess throw out I want to throw out the first game because I think some of the stuff does matter still. But like against the teams that are more talented than Kansas State, and I mean from a pure talent perspective, I would say TCU is there, right? And I would say that Texas is there. They lost both those games. I don't think there's anybody else in the league who's like, and I mean, Baylor's got a ton of talent everywhere, but like that team is way too young. Way, way too young. We're talking about like where the talent is for them on the field. I'm not even sure that team's much more talented than K-State is. But like, I would say Texas and OU are the teams that you look at. And OU, that's not refined talent at all. It's a new coach, not really the same situation. Maybe because it's so weird. Yeah. But like the good teams that were more talented beat them both this year, right? And that Tulane team's actually pretty talented too. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. Like, and think about TCU, and I keep saying this over and over again. Like they're not a Big 12 team if you look at them coming off the bus, Stephen. And I actually I've been saying this a bunch. I legitimately got to watch them physically come off their bus in Kansas City earlier this year at their team hotel and when they were staying. Completely unrelated, had no idea they were staying there. It looks like an NBA team, it's like it looked like Auburn's football team and basketball team are like hanging out together. Like they got some guys who are like, is this the basketball team? Like, who are these dudes? And like, even the guys like Kendrick Miller's a tank. Max Duggan's like really, he's a big girthy dude, man. Yeah. And they have all these dudes like Oliva, those guys up front. I mean, they've got some big guys. They got some long athletic guys. And then you watch them play. They got some fat. I mean, like track speed. Darius Davis got track speed, man. I mean, there's a reason why he's the special teams player of the year. Like as good as Malik Knowles, Phil Brooks are, as fast as those guys are, Davis has a bit more in tank, it feels like, when you watch that guy. And so that's why I think is a bit more on the talent side. And also, if it's a close game and you're asking me to pick a team and also pick a quarterback, Will Howard's been awesome. He's a completely different guy. It's been amazing to see. I know he hasn't really been pressed in an end of game situation where he's like, got to get the job done. But man, Max Duggan, I mean, time in and time out, saved the one fumble against Texas, which was just bizarre and weird.
Yeah, that's weird.
He's been money. He's been money. The team's been money. And I mean, if we think it's going to be a close game and we have one team that's been criticized for only winning close games, wouldn't I just pick the team that's won all the close games? Like, I hate to make it kind of that elementary, but I think that's kind of what it comes down here to. And look, I think it's a close game. Like, I don't think Kansas State's much worse than TCU is. I think they're pretty even teams. Wouldn't be surprised if it goes either way, but I know it's hard to beat a team second time, but I have to go with TCU just because of that. And I would also say, probably under on the total, I think.
It's always tricky with these games because there's pressure and you don't know if these offenses.
I think it's gonna be some nerves. I actually think it's gonna be some nerves. I think it's the way it's gonna be.
Well, and Josh, I can't believe. I mean, Max Duggan's most likely going to be in New York for the Heisman ceremony.
Yeah, he won the Johnny Unitas Award, which I know is not the best thing, but
the guy's Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. I mean, it's like if you told me before the season that he was going to improve and they were going to win, 7 or 8 games, I'd be like, okay, that I could see that happen. But I would think a lot of it, I said this earlier this week, I was like, in my mind, I'd be like, okay, that means they probably used him a lot in the design run game and they really simplified things for him and they were having him throw, high percentage passes. I didn't think it would be him throwing deep crossers and go routes all the time and just sitting in the pocket.
That's his thing. You had talked about it last year. It's it was the intermediate stuff. It just always, And at times this year, it's haunted them too. But
he skipped some.
He's just become this. I mean, they really believe in that guy, and he's played so much. He's played so much football. And I was thinking, Steven, he must suck in practice. He must really suck in practice for him to lose that job, and then just be as good as he is on game day, right? I mean, I think some of that too is with this offense. I think they wanted to be a bit more high percentage, right? I think they thought Chandler Morris gave him that opportunity. And Max has just done a phenomenal job managing that thing.
Well, and what I really heard about it too was Chandler doesn't have Max has a big arm. Chandler doesn't necessarily have that. He is much more anticipation, hitting the throws, making sure the timing's good. And so that's a big reason why they went with him, is just because they thought he was more refined at what they were doing in this offense. And of course, Max has kind of run with it and they've changed things up a bit. But yeah, I'm still in awe of the fact that he's one of the best.
He's going to go to New York. He's going to go to New York. He's going to be a Heisman finalist this year. And you look at the, the contestants kind of, I mean, he won't win this thing. It's Caleb Williams award at this point, sure. I believe. But yeah, I mean, you look back at last year, some of the, just the games that Max Duggan would have, it was never the most efficient guy in the entire world, no. And it
was 11 for 25,
right?
For 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, but,
right? And and a lot of it went to Quentin Johnson, and also they've really not run him at all. It feels like a whole lot, especially since the West Virginia game. And that's the same thing too. Will Howard actually got run a lot last year. They've stopped doing that, and they don't need to. If your passing game's that good, you don't need that deception that you had in the running game, Martinez. So I'm fascinated, Steven. I'm really excited. Hopefully Paul Feinbaum will be watching after he was forced to apologize on the Sports Center thing with Matthew Berry. But it's the only championship game that features 2 top 10 teams. College Game Day is going there. ABC, obviously, at noon. So if you're looking for the game of the weekend, I think this and USC Utah have it written all over it. Steven, I'm really fired up. Where can people find you and the show? Let the folks know where they can get more Locked On Horned Frogs.
Yeah, I'm at Simcox Steven, as you see the handle there. The show is at Locked On TCU, and subscribe on YouTube. We're pushing that too, as everybody is. And then it's obviously also wherever you find your podcast.
Awesome. Steven Simcox of Locked On Horned Frogs. Appreciate your time and very fired up this game.